Okay, can we go on?
Can you hear? Did you test the?
Yes.
Okay. My name's John Shipton. I'm Julian Assange's father. I'm here following the trail of a film named Ithaka, which is about the fight of Julian Assange's Julian Assange's family to free Julian. Julian Assange is a publisher of WikiLeaks, and 14 years ago he published the cable set, which is 250,000 cables from the United States, released by Chelsea Manning, 95,000 files in the Iraq War files, and 400,000 files in the Afghan War files. Sorry, that's the other way around. 95,000 in the Afghan War files, 400,000 in the Iraq War logs, and the Guantanamo Bay files. All of those are subject to espionage charges in the English court to remove Julian from the UK into the United States to pursue Julian for 175 years jail based upon those charges. The hearings would be in Elizabeth in Washington, and that's called the Espionage Court, and it is a court that has never acquitted anybody, ever. So essentially it's a persecution of a publisher, not of the whistleblower, of a publisher for publishing information that is in the public's interest. This must be really clear to everybody, that the publications are for the benefit of the public, and I can give a few examples as we go through some questions, but it's really important to remember that the persecution, the malicious persecution and the unscrupulous scandal and slander that's accompanied Julian Assange is offset to some extent by the benefits that those publications that WikiLeaks made. Really important to remember. And in 3 avenues. The first is justice. The Guantanamo Bay files were used by solicitor Clive Stafford Smith, running an NGO named Reprieve, to bring freedom to some of the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. Equally, the Guantanamo Bay files were used by a solicitor from Australia named Stephen Kenny to bring freedom to Australian prisoners that were in Guantanamo Bay. So that's 2. There are many more examples of the Guantanamo Bay files bringing benefit to human beings, benefit to communities. The cable set released cables that enabled the people of the Chagos Islands, who were all removed and dumped in Mauritius by the United Kingdom, all removed from their lands. The cable set enabled the Chagos Islanders to take a case to the International Court of Justice and prevail. The Court of Justice decided that the United Kingdom must return their lands. So, again, justice, stopping a war. In 2006, outside Baghdad, this again from the cable set, a group of soldiers broke into a house, 11 people, 5 children, handcuffed them and then murdered them all. All of them, the children, the mother and the father. Horrified by what they had done, and thinking they might get into trouble, they called in an airstrike to obliterate all trace of that family from the earth forever. The airstrike failed. A consequence, it generated a report. Their report was assembled in the United States Embassy and forwarded to the State Department. After the release of the publication of the cables by WikiLeaks, that particular cable set were read by the parliamentarians of Iraq and the public of Iraq. This wrecked country, I mean, it really wrecked country. Of its 28 water purification plants, 26 were destroyed. This means, in practical terms, emotional and practical terms, that a mother cannot give her child in Iraq a drink of water for fear that the child will shit itself to death. So this community, somehow, we can't work out this sort of courage because we live in comfortable circumstances, somehow gathered together their courage, founded on the understanding in the cable, and demanded that the United States remove its troops by refusing to sign the Status of Forces Agreement. Status of Forces Agreement removes the occupying army from the normal laws that govern a state. They refused to sign it, and subsequently the United States and its allies, and to my shame, it includes Australia, removed their troops from Iraq and began so for an end to a war and the slow movement towards peace. So there is three understandings that have been brought, oh, and one more, to make it full. In the 400,000 Iraq war files, there were discovered 15,000 citizen deaths in Iraq that had been covered up and forgotten about and buried like dogs in the corner. So they were able to give names to the dead, which is, for human beings, really important. So there you have Assange's suffering, the courage to publish, contrasting with the benefits of publication. It's a bit weighty, I know, sorry. What can you do? This is the truth. You know all this stuff.
How did you get involved in the fight for the truth and the fight for the life of your son? Is it from the start of, or did you recognize it later on, or did it start when you realized he will be having a long and bad time, possibly in the US?
You know, it's a big question. It's a big, very good question. When the Troubles first started in 2011, we agreed to set up a political party called WikiLeaks Party and put Julian up for a Senate position. It's possible to be elected to the Australian Senate if you're an Australian citizen, even though you're in the United Kingdom. So we did that, and that sort of failed. After 2016, I gradually increased the amount of work I did. In 2019, Julian asked me, would I work full-time? And I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. So more or less this section started in 2016 and has gradually increased in tempo, like bolero. Do you know bolero? Classical music. So but I remember speaking to Julian on the phone in 2011, and I said, "Oh, look, you've got to be careful." You know. Anyway, somebody had contacted me from Sweden saying that as Julian got off the plane coming into Sweden, there were 4 Secret Service agencies watching him get off the plane, 2011. 4 Secret Services. So anyway, I said to Julian, you know, somebody will push you off a bridge. I thought that that would be the way they'd handle this, you know, that they'd attempt to assassinate Julian. But they decided that it would be better to intimidate and oppress all press publications by a ceaseless persecution of a publisher and journalist, which has, of course, worked. Yeah.
It has worked, but don't you think that the awareness of Julian Assange as somebody who's well known, and at least in many parts of the world, that this actually will counter-react against those who suppress or tyrannize us in the end? There are many other people who are being, let's say, prosecuted by the deep state, as some call it, like even former President Donald Trump, or you know, Alex Jones, who's one of these guys from very early beginnings. Don't you think that maybe Julian Assange may, let's say, help to get the truth out?
Yeah, we could say that the circumstances of Julian Assange catalysed a movement which is now Western worldwide. But we'd have to say, okay, if it's catalysed that movement, then it's a world historical phenomenon. Because you can't catalyse something that doesn't exist. You know, no, it has to be there, and you add the catalyst. The catalyst remains distinct, but the movement grows. So I think you're correct. Yeah, it has. Particularly in the social media, that's why, you know, the governments are sort of, you know, oppressing social media madly, you know, because they don't like. I just argue all the time. People ask me, what can we do? Well, just talk. The logos is the answer, the word. Just speak to each other. Have people round to dinner. Say, oh, look, I discovered this about Assange. Did you read this about... and so on and so forth. Because I think, you know, we were speaking about truth. I think what happens to people is that when they find a truth, 2 things. There's in the Bible this thing that says, where 3 people and more are gathered together in my name, I will be there. This is an allegory for truth. Where 3 of us get together and try and conjure up a truth, the truth will emerge. And the funny thing about, not funny, but the profound thing about truth is that when people find it, they act. It's automatic. They act. When you see, you know, your daughter fall over in the street and scratches her knee, you don't say, oh, well, you know, I don't know what to do. But if you see the truth immediately, you go and pick her up and say, are you okay? No. And you give her a hug and so on. So you act upon the perception of a truth.
Sure. Hi, I'm Philip Berger of the the Swiss Pirate Party, a party which fights for privacy for the people and transparency for everybody else. So this was a thing that Julian said once. Yeah, I know a lot of people who were involved with WikiLeaks, and some of them, they tell me that they had strange incidents. Some of their cell phones were bugged, and there was other things happening. Did you also had such incidents, or do you think the Secret Service people are actually trying to intimidate people who fight for Julian Assange?
For myself, I haven't experienced that. I'm 79, so there'll be no Me Too, okay? No, I don't have that worry. If my phone is... What do they want to bug my phone for? I don't have armies. I don't have 6 million viewers on YouTube, like who's Russell Brand, you know. They're not, and they don't take any notice of what I do. Nothing. But what they take notice of is what coalesces around the movement to free Julian. They don't take any notice of me. But if, for example, last week, a delegation of Australian parliamentarians went to the United States, to Washington, and got 2 weeks of continuous news, they take notice of that. But me, sorry, they won't take notice. Yeah. In fact, I think I begin to suspect that we perform a service to power, because power is not homogeneous, and there are certain, in the United States and the CIA, for example, there are certain elements that, so there's the evangelical right-wing element in the CIA, there's the democratic section of the CIA. They will use the Assange phenomenon to further themselves, because they're fighting over territory. Also, there are people in the State Department who will ensure that we get a free run. You know, that nobody, for example, you know, I don't get pulled off a plane and searched and so on, because they believe in the circumstances of the American Constitution, which has the First Amendment, okay, which is really important to them. So there's certain constitutionalists in the United States which will ensure that we get a free run because we're a service to them. So it's not, there's no singular Satan in this, you know, there's no devil, you know, like, there is just a certain set of forces that, for example, in the case of Julian Assange, it's said that the forces are in the National Security Agency. The chair of the National Security Agency is Jake Sullivan, and Under Secretary of State is Victoria Nuland. Both Nuland and Sullivan were mentored by Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is savage and vindictive, so she invented Russiagate and so on and so forth. So you can see where the pulse comes from. It's the fierce anger of Hillary Clinton and her acolytes, and certain sections of the CIA who find, and National Security Agency who find the First Amendment a nuisance.
My name is Andreas Noll. I'm actually not a journalist. I was one of the first initiatives in Switzerland supporting Julian Assange, give Julian asylum in Switzerland. That's going back to 2019. And my question would be, when Julian was arrested, it was under Trump, the Trump administration. Afterwards, it came out that the CIA under Trump plotted to assassinate him or to kidnap him. And now the government has, well, the people making the government has changed. Now Joe Biden is in the Oval Office. What is your impression? Did anything change at all, or is it basically the same? What are your impressions?
You know, he was inaugurated, I think, on the 6th, Biden, and a little while, I forget his name now, but the spokesperson for the National Security Section of the Department of Justice immediately says that we will continue the prosecution. So it's institutional, yeah. It's an institutional. I find most things are actually, you know, we expect, say for example, you vote for a person and they become Prime Minister, and you think, well, they'll take their policies with them, and that. But I don't think a single person said, you know, I don't know the name of your Prime Minister, but I think it's delusive. I feel that it's delusive to think that a person can be voted in with a set of policies and then go and institute those policies. It doesn't seem to me to be possible, because you get 5 people in his group. In Australia, for example, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has 5,300 employees and has Australian Secret Intelligence Services, the Secret Service Intelligence Directorate, and it used to have ASIO, which is the Internal Security section. 5 people are going to change the institutional momentum of 5,300 with a $2 billion a year contract and 3 sections of its institution in 5 eyes. I mean, you know, dream on. I know that sounds a bit cynical, but it's just like, it's best to be accurate, you know. If we want to change something, it's best to be firm and see that power is not homogeneous, so this gives us opportunities, and that it's because it's become institutional, it will take particular sorts of effort. I've found that, you know, that your question, and I turn it to calling it catalysing, that the best thing to do if you want to change anything is go and see people. Go on the road. What the current system is money, media, power. Money, media, power. Money. They're always raising money to put an ad in the paper or whatever. AMLO, the Mexican who's successful left-wing president of Mexico, every day he has his own television show, 2 hours. Gets up early, does 2 hours. He takes straight to the people the policies. the Congress, their parliament, wouldn't allow for the institution of free education because they're using the American system, which is a rotten system, but anyway, they're using it. So what he did was he went on his television show and he said, we're going to give 11 million scholarships. Well, you imagine the Congress going against that and saying, no, you can't give that, no, we're not going to pass that law. Well, forget about it. So I think, just as a generalisation, because you live in Switzerland, you will see these things because you have the sovereign system. All genius arises from the mass and then is distributed. It arises from within us and our families and our kids and our little communities and our contacts. It arises, if you want to be more specific, from the loins of the men and women of the nation. That's its genius comes from. So the habit of thinking that it comes down from the parliament, ridiculous. The knowledge is with us, it's not there. Our knowledge percolates up and is sorted and it becomes their knowledge then. But it's ours, every time. Our wealth, our children. Who's, anybody, not your children? They don't contribute? Well, no, they do. Your family, your lovers. Your clue was, spot on, if I can say so. I think that's an essential understanding, that it's with us and it's with our words. And once we have that feeling in the breast, then we can take what is ours. And what is ours is the policy formulation of the states we live in. When it's handed over to certain sections, you get the mess that Germany's become. Who would have believed 5 years ago that Germany would voluntarily bankrupt itself? That somebody would blow up all of its gas supply and the man would sit, the Chancellor would sit there and say, oh gee, that's not very good.
Well, most probably the Germans are in the hand of somebody else. I mean, the German government. That's what.
Yeah, of course. I won't argue with that. He was Attorney General Scholz, and he was a terrible crook, covered up Deutsche Bank's crimes. I know about the man and his vulnerabilities, but it doesn't mean to say, that in the spirit of that man, there's collapse under his vulnerabilities or the determination to be a German citizen. You have to break out of it.
Needs to come from the bottom.
Yes.
So if the people are asleep, you will not be successful. That's everywhere. It's in Switzerland the same thing.
Yes.
So we have to get up from our bottoms and do something. And that's the same thing what you're saying. I mean,
yes.
Julian can only be helped if lots of people are standing up, demanding to get the truth out and to release it. Or it's the people's power,
yes,
which is needed. Not the legal system, because that's corrupt.
Well, the legal system will respond to us, judges, and they respond, judges are really vulnerable to shame and accusation, very vulnerable. They hate being in the news. So lawyers, actually, most of them don't like being in the news either. I don't know why.
Question from you?
Yeah, sorry.
My name is Chris Schmidt. I'm member of the Swiss Digital Society. We are 1,000 people in Switzerland with the aim of supporting human and other rights in the digital space. And so my question, I'm not a journalist either, so but my question of interest is rather, did you or the people supporting Julian Assange manage to get support within the US? I probably should know this, but I'm not aware. What is the support from
Okay, this is a good question. I can answer. Robert Kennedy Jr., who's a friend, he says that if elected, he will pardon Julian Assange. Cornel West, the Green Party, says the same thing. Marianne Williamson, who's a Democratic candidate, says the same thing. Trump's son says that his father will act to free Julian. The circumstances of Trump are really a bit convoluted and hard to understand. Many people accuse Trump of this, that and the other. But, he was president of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, they say over and over again. He didn't have enough power to order a cup of coffee in the White House. He would sign a paper and they'd hide it in the desk. They took his name off Twitter, fuck's sake. Wake up. He is the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world. He can't get on Twitter. They took his name off Facebook. He had 80 million followers on Facebook. They said, sorry, we don't like you anymore. This is the most powerful man in the world. They kick him off Facebook. So I think we've got to understand a bit more of the circumstances of Donald Trump in the last 12 months of government. Better to answer your question. So 24 of the largest civic organisations in the United States published a letter in November, last November, saying that Julian must be freed. Sorry, not last November, the November after Biden was elected. I remember the sequence now. So they published that letter on the 14th of November, and then on the 8th of January, after the inauguration, Mark Raimondi, who's the National Security spokesperson for the Department of Justice, said we're going to go ahead with the prosecution. So that's that circumstance. So all of the major civic organisations said we're okay, free him. The New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, El Pais, all of them published a letter in an editorial simultaneously in all of those newspapers who were partners in the publication, saying that the charges must be dropped. They said that the espionage charges must be dropped, but they left in some doubt about the computer intrusion charge, which is a 5-year. Yes. So if he was charged on the computer intrusion, it would be a 5-year sentence. So that indicates it's pretty broad, the support. Gabrielle and I took Ithaka to the United States. We did 60 Q&As and exhibitions across the United States in 47 days, in 42 cities, 9 universities. Nearly killed me, get in the car, go to the next one, blah, blah. And we never had less than 30 people for each. Some of them were quite small, some of them were full to overflowing. But what was interesting was this: in the north, the cinema would divide in half, and the Democrats would sit on that side, and the red hats, MAGA hats, would sit on this side. It's unbelievable. They won't speak to each other, but they'll speak to us. They speak to us, they speak to us. And in New York, two men were sitting together and they asked a question which was positive about Trump, and the entire cinema started to boo. Ah, boo, get out! Can you believe that? They're very fractious over it. They can't get anything done. They all hate each other.
If I may continue, from the procedural, the process, what would need to be done? What would need to be switched?
Procedurally, legal procedure. Well,
which person would you need to convince?
Which person could say?
Yeah, you mentioned probably if the president would give it.
Well, the president, of course, has the power.
Else?
Well, in practical, you want a practical answer? Then the president could say that we have concerns over the First Amendment, embarrassment of the First Amendment, and so we would like the espionage charges reviewed. And that the Department of Justice would say, we've taken into account the concerns over the First Amendment, and we suspend the espionage charges, but we will continue to pursue the computer intrusion. Yeah. So that's impractical. However, it's a political prosecution, not a legal one. So, the answer has to come from the politicians.
I have another question. You said it's a political persecution, not a legal prosecution. However, the legal system plays its role in all of that. And I've wondered, I followed the processes in the UK for extradition, and I wondered, has it ever been an option to go to the European Court of Human Rights, which I think, in my personal opinion, is the most possible supporter for Julian Assange, because he is the court is not British, it's not American, and it is quite bold on its decisions. And I thought as a lawyer that would be his best shot to get out of prison in the UK. Has that ever been
yes.
taken in recognition?
I believe they approached the ECHR, and the ECHR replied that we are interested in hearing, but you must exhaust all other legal remedies first. So that's the circumstance there. As for the United Kingdom, I think Winston Churchill was instrumental in setting up the Council of Europe. Of course, just so that the UK had influenced Europe. And now they last year proposed this absurdity, which is they call a Bill of Rights, based upon community values, to take over from the legislation, the human rights legislation, which embraces the ECHR. However, they haven't done that yet. And the ECHR has no power, and the United States rarely takes any notice. So there's one example of a Spanish man who, in the agreement with the Department of Justice in the United States, that he was to get 10 years jail, but he would serve that in Spain, okay, in a particular sort of prison in Spain. It took him 7 years of court actions to get the United States to agree to ship him to Spain. So the United States takes no notice, and the stature of Europe has declined so precipitously that expecting the United Kingdom to obey a ruling from the ECHR is like 50-50. 10 years ago, of course, the European Union, or the European peoples, had prestige and stature which would have given them authority and power, but it's gone now. I don't know where. Anyway, it's gone.
So basically, the lawyers are afraid that the UK might disobey a ruling from the European Court of Human Rights, and that might set a negative sign. If the UK would disobey, other countries might follow on other issues. So the European Court of Human Rights might lose its authority?
No, the other way around. So it's lost its authority, lost some of its authority. In the example of the Spanish man, they just disobeyed the court. Okay. The lawyers will take the matter before the ECHR. And they won't, because they all have vocations, they won't speak like I'm speaking. Okay, they have to go to work the next day, feed the kids. They can't risk their vocation speaking like I do. But also there's another interesting thing in the structure of law in Europe, is that there's lots of really clever lawyers. And a lot of them specialise in European law and ECH law, and that's the ceiling. Once you become a lawyer, it's the very height of once you become an ECHR listed lawyer, that's the highest you can go, and there you wait for a judge to die or whatever, or get arrested for corruption. Oops. But I did have dinner some time ago with an ECHR judge, and she said to me that we would look forward to hearing the Assange case, which of course means that there'd be an opportunity for the court to assert itself. Yes.
How is Julian actually? How is he doing? Do you have a direct contact?
I saw him
have you seen him?
yesterday. Where am I? Day before yesterday, in London. Was it yesterday? Yeah. And he did seem positive and vigorous. Yeah. I think mostly because the Australian government's fully engaged, and there's and the Australian publics, 88% of the Australian public want Julian brought home. This is enormous. 88% support for anything is enormous. And the Assange parliamentary group has 50 members, and 62 of those signed the letter to I think, from memory, to the Department of Justice, and that was sent just recently. So the support there, you know, yeah. Australia's very strong. France is strong. Of course, all of Latin America is strong. Yeah. Millions. It's a worldwide phenomenon. And it's through 2 weeks of news through, you know, all of Europe and America and Australia. Extraordinary. And this is all focused on injustice to one man. This has become a symbol of the frustrations that we feel. The governments, of course, take no notice of us at the moment. They wander around doing whatever they like.
Another question. Would Australia extradite its own citizens?
The treaty obligations between Australia and the United States are beneficial to the United States.
Okay.
However, the other way around, so over the last 15 years, the United States has rewritten all of its extradition treaties with whomever it could, and you cannot extradite from the United States for political purposes. You cannot. So they give asylum to people that they favour. Yeah. In the case of the United Kingdom, the treaty obligations between the United Kingdom and the United States specifically state that you cannot extradite for political offences. Specifically says that. But the prosecution argues that the laws of England don't include the treaty obligations, because the treaty obligations are for the United Kingdom, which is Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England. So England can extradite Assange. Anyway, I think that's how it's worked. Yeah.
Maybe one last question.
One more?
Or
You want a question?
Oh, sorry.
You're very quiet.
I'm a listener tonight, I think.
Okay.
Okay, I have one question. There are lots of journalists in Switzerland who don't care about Julian Assange and claim that he's not a publisher, he's something else. So what would you tell those journalists? Why should they care about this case?
It seems self-evident, doesn't it? But however, you know, journalists have to care because it demonstrates to them that if they say something that the government is even, or a corporation, now it's moving into corporations too. If the journalist publishes something that the government objects to, even slightly, or a corporation objects to, they can be stripped of their wealth and their freedom. Using the example of Assange. Now it's common actually. First of all, they stopped his money. His personal account, they took the money out. It was in Switzerland. The account was in Switzerland. Oh, it's finished, gone, sorry. And also WikiLeaks accounts. This is in 2010. Now it's quite common. Who did it happen to the other day? Somebody the other day offended the government and had their money taken off them. I can't remember at the moment, but you remember the truckers in Canada. They had $10 million in a GoFundMe account, and GoFundMe confiscated that money and said, we're going to distribute it to a charity. And it happened to that's 3 years ago, but it happened to somebody just last just a few days ago, and I can't bring their name to mind, that a GoFundMe. It also happened to Trump, that his fundraiser was unavailable. Who did it happen to?
Yeah, we had iBuyBuy, for example, had his account that they took it away from him at Credit Suisse. So shortly after, he said something negative about Switzerland.
I actually do have a question. You're Julian Assange's father.
Yes.
What do you think we have to teach our kids?
Julian was brought up by his mum, so I have to surrender to the feminine completely in that. But I just think, the thing, how does it go? To be loved gives courage. To love gives commitment. Okay, there's your answer. If you want your children to have courage, just love them. Just don't lay out things, just love them, If they make a mistake, don't worry, spill the milk, I don't care about that. Help me clean it up. Just love them. Instead of saying, oh God, you've spilt the milk again, what am I going to do? I've got a week's work in front of me. Just say, give me a hand to clean this up. Yeah. Just love. And they become so strong. In fact, I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and they're all bossy, and they're all smarter than me. Well, there you go. And their mothers are smarter than me too. The only thing, the mothers must have been blinded by the light or something.
Ich habe große Ehrungen, hier zu intervenieren, weil es ist eine absolut spannende Diskussion. Ich fand das wirklich toll und es war eine Fundgrube für Wake News, die das gefilmt hat. Wir haben diesen Raum für 260 Franken für eine Stunde gemietet und wir müssen ja noch zu diesem Filmabend gehen. Wir haben eigentlich schwergewichtig die lokalen Medien eingeladen und ich finde es noch interessant, hier zu sehen, wie groß das Interesse der lokalen Medien ist. Ich weiß nicht, ob Sie...
Ich bin von der des Basel.
Ah ja, das ist ja nicht unbedingt lokal, aber immerhin ein Medium. Ich finde das einfach noch interessant, wollte das bemerken. Ich habe hier noch ein paar von den Programmen für die Veranstaltung, für den Film, die Filmvorführung heute Abend. Da seid ihr natürlich eingeladen, selbstverständlich. Und möchte hiermit eigentlich diese Pressekonferenz beenden, wenn nicht noch etwas Dringendes zu fragen wäre. Okay? So we can.
Okay.
Yeah,
Coming.
Oh, sorry.
Don't worry.
No.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good.
And great that you caught on that it arises from the people.
I'll send you the video.
Thank you.
The link. Okay, thank you very much. And most respected regards to your son, Julian Assange, please.
I will.
Why don't you at least keep one of those flyers from us?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You can have 1, 2 or 3 if you want to. If you may want to give it to somebody. Thank you very much.
Ja gut, das haben wir nicht gehört.
Es kommt vielleicht noch am Film.
Ja, klar.
Da wird es wahrscheinlich größer zu erleben.